560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Our friend Amity Shlaes had a good piece over at National Review entitled The Curse of Bigness, talking about sort of the history of trust busting in America. But that curse of bigness seems limited, right? It's big companies, not big government. There doesn't seem to be any curse directed at ever-expanding government. So the whole trust-busting thing, government as the white hat and big bad corporations as the black hat, has the whole thing been more or less a fraud from the beginning? Is the whole dichotomy as presented a just disingenuous, a way to sort of cover the tracks of the relationship between big business and big government, a relationship that's always existed, with one more or less trying to have the one up on the other? How should we conceive of these things, since you hear the populist rhetoric from these trust busters, including Biden administration functionaries like Lena Khan, the head of the Federal Trade Commission, spewing this populist rhetoric about going after the big guys on behalf of the small guys? Well, let's have a discussion about that with Amity. Amity Shlaes, board chair of the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation, winner of the Hayek Prize, best-selling author of The Forgotten Man, A New History of the Great Depression, and Great Society, A New History. Pick them up both if you haven't. Amity, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
I am so glad to be with you. I think one word you said, populist, is the trouble. You can't confuse economics and political wishes. We might politically wish that things were going better, we were earning more, companies would stay and build out. But sometimes when you jump in and call the change economic, that's something else. And that's what happened originally when we started doing this in the 1890s and particularly in the early 1900s with the great trust buster, the octopus hunter, Theodore Roosevelt. And we're just kind of reprising that today. People are angry about a lot of things, and it comes out in the prosecution or persecution of big companies, but the results are what those who need help want.
Well, so, I mean, thinking about the quote-unquote robber barons of yore, something that Bert Folsom wrote a good book about, the myth of said robber barons, but thinking about the great industrialists at the turn of the 20th century, that period, the Gilded Era, as compared to the big tech oligarchs of the day, the Zuckerbergs and the Musks and the Google boys. Do you see any significant differences, or is this again just a situation of the history we don't know? Nothing new in this world, just the history we don't know.
Nothing new but the history we don't know. What happened then back in the past is like now. A new technology comes, and wow, the companies that rise up from it instantaneously seem unstoppable. And then we say, this is different. This is a new kind of company. They rule the economy. Railroads appeared to rule the economy in the original trust-busting period. Guess what? They don't. Even as the government was prosecuting the pants off the railroad industry, it was losing to a challenger, trucking. So it wasn't there forever, railroads. It wasn't the only road, a train. So what the government does is go after companies that are at their zenith, and waste a lot of time. And by the way, make that industry, beat that industry up so much that it's not able to do well and often fails. That's what happened with railroads. There's a pretty clear case that the prosecution and persecution of the railroads led to the Panic of 1907, which had caused unemployment closer to 10% than 5%. That is, a lot of regular people lost their job because of the government's drama theater over getting at what was called the curse of Bigness. I'm glad you mentioned that book by Bert Folsom. I have a new column called Forgotten Book, and in that I do talk about older books. And Bert went through the robber barons. They're not all the caricature that one would assume. Some of them are just guys with a gun or guys with clout, as we say in Chicago, who took over something and held onto a monopoly, like a ferry path across the river. Others were true innovators, and one has to make the distinction. Usually guys who grab something hold on to it for a while, but not forever. And usually innovations are overtaken by new innovations. So anyway, I was fascinated because I never looked into this area. I really never did. I hope Amy's there too. To see the way the past replays the present.
Well, I mean, right. So, but the whole bigness, this whole, so what I started out saying, this whole dichotomy that's presented is, the trust busting public servants against the robber barons. I mean, that's a fraud that the government is perpetuating.
That's right.
What they really don't want, they encourage rent-seeking behavior because it enhances their control of industry. So what they really don't want is just somebody that gets beyond their effective control. If that's somebody that is just like
Exactly.
at the individual level, somebody that isn't effectively dependent on them.
Yeah, and I use, to use a much more recent analogy, which some listeners may recall, in the olden days, which were the 90s, people thought the browser that Microsoft was using was going to beat everything. And so there was a big prosecution of Microsoft with Joel Klein, if people remember, and David Boies. And it went on TV for years, and Mr. Bill Gates squirmed in his seat in the deposition chair. And while this prosecution of the only company that could manage a browser and make an innovative browser or team up with them was going down, another browser appeared called Google, and
Right.
and obviated the browser that was the center of this case. I believe it was Netscape. So, I mean, it's absurd theater, and it has political sense. People are angry. They maybe don't like Microsoft. They don't like a big company now. There are newer companies, but that the market takes care of that itself. The bigness isn't abiding, and that's the fallacy and the curse of bigness. What is abiding and more problematic is what you're getting at, the government monopoly, the big government. And what I was trying to get at in this column is our curse of bigness is big government. And the original sin, their friend, I don't know if you agree, like to know, was 2008. When we said government is not only the rescuer, it's also the arbiter of who survives and who fails in the 2008 financial crisis. And once, the government could decide that, well, the government can do anything, right?
Yeah, but how do you stop certain Americans from becoming reliant on government to save them, to help them, during a COVID crisis or rescuing big banks?
Well, first of all, you inform them of facts. But once you tell someone he's always got to be, on kidney dialysis, he believes it, and always got to be, on something else. Every morning has to have a certain vitamin. So I do think part of it is education, which is a boring thing to talk about, but so important because you can't talk about this in a political campaign and things move too fast. But the evidence suggests, tell your children, look at the evidence yourself, have a look at that Folsom book, or look back at Microsoft. The evidence suggests the theater is unnecessary, and the evidence suggests the government slows things down as per the awful recovery after 2008. So slow, so halting, so many years. That's very important too, don't you think? Or am I getting it wrong?
Right, and of course, I mean, you're talking about the too big to fail, and the government being the arbiter, and the government was the arbiter even on a grander scale during COVID, which businesses could stay open, how they could stay open, who's indispensable and who isn't. I mean, that's essentially where the authority so many have ceded government. You can decide who gets to make a living and who doesn't, who gets to live and who doesn't.
I just want to say one more thing. I remember, and you remember, and Amy remembers that when we got more national health care, what some people call Obamacare, some people warned, well, the health care industry is going to take over the economy. And I thought, well, maybe. I know it's a large part of the economy. But what COVID showed is the healthcare industry can, not just economically, but culturally. The hospitalization of our economy. We walk around. That's what the masks are really, is extending the hospital outside the hospital to the whole economy, and thereby ceding authority to the medical. I'm not paranoid, but let's say the medical establishment. Well, the medical establishment is good at being doctors, but they're pretty bad economists. And the decisions they make hurt us when they're allowed to decide, say, I don't know, create a culture that decides about mortgage payments or who goes to work over a long period of time. So the dark prophecies of the time when we got the new health care plan came true in COVID. The hospital culture runs our economy, and that is a strange thing.
What do you say to people, including Republicans on the Hill, as you've undoubtedly seen, who say, the big corporate titans today are different than Standard Oil, different than the railroads, because of the cultural sway they have in the digital age, the influence of these social media giants,
well,
the cultural influence they have.
The cultural influence is really strong. Whose fault is that? Ours. Why? By which I mean common sense people. Why? We didn't educate. We never mounted a counter to public television or public radio. We never stopped teacher unions, who are not evil, but who do impart and oversee the imparting of a history of America that suits their interests, which is a more unionized government supervised America, and we did that for generations and looked away and produced a lot of angry talk radio or Fox. These things have their place. They're great in campaigns. One reason I like your show is you actually read these books. It's possible to have serious discussions among conservatives of a level that is on public television or public radio, but that isn't what usually happens. What happens is the thoughtful culture is the progressive culture in the media, and the other culture, the angry ranting culture, is the market-oriented or conservative culture. We've got to change that by showing that the arguments here are solid. Over time, I think it's invent a better mousetrap instead of try and take down their mousetrap is the answer to what you're asking.
She is Amity Shlaes, board chair of the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation, winner of the Hayek Prize, best-selling author of The Forgotten Man, A New History of the Great Depression, as well as Great Society, A New History. Amity, thanks as always. Appreciate your time.
Honored to be on your show.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Wesley is a truck driver.
I drive a truck, and I love what I do.
A truck driver with IRS troubles.
They told me I owed them $43,000.
It got really bad.
Quite a few letters in the mail. They were talking about wage garnishment, coming after my house, my car. Yeah, they don't play around. I seriously thought that I was going to lose everything.
One sleepless night, Wesley finally made a call to Optima Tax Relief at 2 a.m.
Kind of figured I'd get a machine, but I didn't. I actually got to talk to an actual person in the middle of the night.
He found just what he was looking for.
Oh, they were great people. You need a team of people that